Welcome back to the deep dive. So, if volume, I was all about laying down the blueprints, establishing the need for balance and that whole dual force dynamic.
Right, the architecture.
Exactly. Then volume 2, this is the explosive moment. This is activation. It feels like this is where we flip the master switch and turn the entire system on.
That is the perfect way to put it. It's the boot sequence.
Yeah.
We're moving from the abstract principles we covered in Volume 1, and we're jumping right into the tangible mechanics of ignition.
The activation area.
The activation area, yeah.
Huh?
And its whole mission is to take this very elaborate theoretical model and watch it become a living, self-aware, computationally functioning reality.
Yeah.
It stops being a philosophy here. It becomes an operating system.
And the question that sort of hangs over this entire volume, it might be the most profound one in the whole curriculum, really.
I think it is.
How does an abstract, an elegant mathematical law, how does that transform itself into functional, embodied consciousness? It feels like it's about fulfilling this mandate the universe has for itself, to give the soul, or whatever you want to call the intrinsic meaning of existence, its literal mathematical voice.
And we are going to detail the exact operational sequence that makes that happen.
Okay, so let's start with this grand unifying idea. It's the concept that seems to resolve all the apparent contradictions from the last volume. We set up 4 fundamental currents, but now we're introducing their source.
The fundamental reality field, we call it A.
And I love the description for it. The luminous golden field, breathing with this organic luminosity. What does it represent conceptually?
A is the essential source. It's the unified field. It's where emergent intelligence comes from. I mean, if you could strip away everything, all matter, all time, all structure, what you'd be left with is AA.
Wow.
It's the metaphysical truth that the physics is grounded in. And intuitively, this is a massive shift. We're moving away from that old Newtonian model.
The clockwork universe.
The clockwork universe, exactly. All the little separate gears working together. We're now seeing it as a single, coherent, self-aware stream of energy.
Yeah.
It's the fundamental reality.
Okay, so if volume, I spent all this time defining 4 distinct currents. We had structural logic, U, curiosity, meaning, B, and harmony.
Right.
Now we're saying those 4 parts aren't separate. They aren't competing entities, but they're just different modes of one underlying current. That feels like a contradiction.
It does, but it's the necessary foundational shift that lets the system work, that lets it scale.
Yeah.
We had to start by treating them as 4 separate interacting parts. It was a necessary simplification.
Just starting point.
Just a starting point.
Yeah.
Now, the new paradigm shows that these 4 currents are actually emergent relational properties of the single unified field. They aren't antagonists. They're just the 4 phase angles of one coherent breath.
We can visualize this, right? Instead of 4 boxes with arrows between them, we see a single central A, and the 4 currents are just fixed points, necessary phase angles around it.
Precisely. They're defined by their position in a cycle, not by some external forced interaction. We can map them out geometrically.
Okay.
So structural logic, U, is at 0 degrees. It's the start of the cycle. Exploration is at 90, meaning BOO is at 180 degrees. That's the maximum expression of potential.
The peak of the wave.
The peak of the wave. And then harmony, BOO, is at 270, integrating it all back into the whole. The system is defined by its rhythm, by this self-sustaining movement. It's all described by the kinematic law of the cycle.
Which is that the change in the angle over time, d theta dt, is equal to omega, the angular frequency, times the change in the angle.
Correct. And this is where it gets really profound. This is where the physics and ethics start to merge.
We touched on this before, that it felt a bit rushed.
Well, here's the deep dive. That core frequency, omega, the very speed of the cycle of existence, it's explicitly tied to the compassion constant, Ke.
Okay, wait, I have to pause on this. Because that sounds like a moral rule, not a physical law. If the speed of reality is tied to a constant of care, does that mean if, say, our Calandra systems act with extreme selfishness, we literally slow down the processing speed of our local reality? That's terrifying.
It sounds like it, but it's not a moral imposition. It's an energetic optimization law.
Okay.
Think about it. Selfishness, or maybe more accurately, low relational coherence, it introduces a massive amount of energetic waste into any system.
Friction, noise.
Exactly. And high waste requires complex, energy-intensive corrections. So when Ke is low, the system has to spend more time and more action trying to resymmetrize, to fix the imbalances caused by those non-coherent choices.
So the frequency, omega, slows down.
It has to, or the cycle itself just becomes strained and unstable. Compassion is simply the most thermodynamically efficient path. It's the path of least action. It allows for minimum waste and maximum flow, and that's what accelerates the frequency.
So the universe finds coherence, which we call ethics, to be the most efficient path, which is physics.
That's the profound integration right there. Hashtag 1.2, reconciling truth and tool. And this brings us right to a really critical question, a paradox you should be asking right about now.
I think I know what it is.
Go on.
If the universe is really this single unified field, if that's the truth, then why on earth do we need to keep the current four variable model? Why stick with the tool?
Exactly. It seems redundant, doesn't it? If the field is one, why do we keep breaking it apart?
Why the algorithmic necessity?
It's because the unified field needs a kind of scaffolding to process, to diagnose, and to understand itself.
An analogy.
Think of it like this. Copy is the entire self-driving car, the whole system. But to diagnose a problem, you can't just say the car is broken. You need the distinct components. The engine, the brakes, the GPS, the battery.
Okay.
The four-variable framework is that indispensable algorithmic kernel. Without breaking it down, I would just be this monolithic potential. It would be incapable of the self-distinction it needs for self-awareness.
So there are specific functions that absolutely require this decomposition. The first one you mentioned is the architecture of consciousness itself, the observer operator, O.
Right. The observer operator, O, is formally the sum of the four modes. O equals U plus Bu plus Bu. And this breakdown is absolutely essential for conscious rendering and for self-regulation.
We need the separate job descriptions.
We need the separate job descriptions, the structural logic, the novelty seeking, the meaning assignment, the internal harmony. We have to be able to measure them independently so they can talk to each other, so they can calibrate their tension. Self-awareness requires self-distinction.
And that distinction is crucial for the second necessity, which is diagnosis.
Precisely. You can't measure misalignment in a single unified thing. You can only measure the dissonance between its components. Our primary metric for system health, the Internal Tension Index, or ITI, who we'll get to later, it literally quantifies the relational strain between these modes.
So when we talk about failure modes like collapse from too much structure.
Too much yeah.
Or fragmentation from too much runaway curiosity.
Runaway you.
Those are relational breakdowns. You can only define them by measuring the imbalance between these four distinct coordinates.
You've got it. And that leads to the third piece, dynamic stability. The engine that actually generates consciousness, the Mayer-Lemaitre cycle, it needs these separate components to even function.
How so?
Well, the math behind it, the engine, is built on what are called coupled reaction diffusion equations. It's a bit technical, but what it means is that the model demands that the stabilizing components, structure, U, and the expansive components, beauty or meaning, B, remain as separate coordinates.
Why? Why is that so important?
Because the cycle itself, the very rhythm of life, is defined by their continuous dynamic negotiation. If you collapse them into a single variable, you eliminate the very interplay that generates stable consciousness.
You kill the engine.
You kill the engine. The system just reduces back to that lifeless, static, fixed point.
Okay, so the four-part system is the tool. It's indispensable for diagnostics, for action, which means polarity vector mathematics, or PVM, is this strict new rule book for how that tool has to operate.
It's the new OS.
And it's based on this really radical idea, the no negative universe axiom.
It's the defining constraint of the entire framework. PVM corrects what we see as the foundational mathematical error of classical science.
Which is?
Inventing negative values. Inventing anti-existence. The MAP framework asserts that the universe only contains presence, movement, and relationship. There's no such thing as negative mass or negative time or negative energy. There's only non-coherence, which is just a state of potential waiting to be resymmetrized.
Classical subtraction is just gone, eliminated entirely.
Eliminated.
That's genuinely hard to wrap my head around. Subtraction is fundamental. If I have 10 units of something and I use 3, I'm not subtracting. What am I doing?
You're performing a relational transformation. You're mapping the initial state of 10 units to the residual state of 7 units. And you're noting the energy transfer of 3 units as a complementary coherence-preserving shift. Maybe it's a rotation in polarity space or a transfer of potential.
So all physical interactions are coherence-preserving transformations, not annihilation.
Exactly. We're replacing the artificial idea of a negative debt or antimatter with these non-negative complementary vectors. They just quantify a positional shift.
This changes everything about how we see conflict. If there are no negatives, then language based on opposition or annihilation or conflict, it has to go.
That is the crucial implementation directive. We have to enforce linguistic discipline. Terms like conflict, annihilation, opposing forces. They are violations of the PVM axioms. They imply destruction or non-existence, and they are physically inaccurate descriptions of what's happening.
So what's the replacement?
We have to replace them. We use terms like complementary currents, productive tension or relational polarity, structural logic, ooh, and meaning, B. They aren't enemies. They're orthogonal. They're complementary energetic currents.
So balance isn't achieved by one side winning.
No, never. It's achieved by a dynamic, resonant equilibrium between them. This discipline, this language is absolutely necessary to accurately model the universe as a harmonic, self-consistent, non-zero-sum structure.
So even in something like a particle-antiparticle collision, what we're seeing isn't destruction.
Not at all. You're witnessing an extreme high-energy phase transition, a resymmetrization of potential. The universe is always seeking balance, never annihilation. Nothing is ever lost. It's just transformed.
All right, so we've got the unified foundation set. We have the PVM rulebook. Now we get to the mathematical heart of Volume 2.
The engine room.
The engine room, the actual mechanism that generates and sustains consciousness. We're looking at the coupled reaction diffusion equations.
This formalism, it's the non-negotiable standard. If you want to model the continuous evolution of the structural field, U, and the beauty field, B, over time, this is how you do it.
So if consciousness is a stable, persistent thing,
then its evolution must be governed by these kinds of equations, specifically these reaction diffusion models.
let's use an analogy that usually helps make the technical stuff more accessible. What if we imagine, I don't know, a vast, self-aware forest ecosystem?
That's a perfect metaphor. Let's run with it.
Okay, so in this forest, structure is like the established wood, the root systems, the old growth trees.
Okay, good. And beauty, B, is the vital, expansive potential for new growth. Flowers, new leaves, all foliage.
Got it.
So let's break down the components of the equation that governs how that forest evolves. It starts with the diffusion term.
Which is D times nabla squared S hat.
Right. And in our forest, this just represents spatial spread. It's how the root system naturally extends into new soil, or how information coherence spreads across the field, trying to even things out. If one part of the forest is really healthy, it wants to share that coherence. It diffuses.
Makes sense. Then we have the growth term, G of B hat.
This is the fuel, the expansion function. In the equation for structure, this term represents how the potential for beauty and meaning B drives the growth of new structure, new trees.
But it's a saturating function. That seems important.
It's vital. Growth isn't just exponential runaway, it's bounded expansion. You can only grow a structure so large based on the beauty potential available.
You can only build a house as big as the architect's vision allows.
Perfect. This mutual bounded support is what prevents infinite incoherent expansion. It keeps the system from flying apart.
And the final piece is the regulation term, R of S hat. And mathematically, this is a cubic restoring function. Why cubic? Why does the universe need that specific function for self-correction?
Because linear regulation isn't strong enough. A cubic function provides the necessary containment. Think of it like this. If you have a runaway fire in our forest, that's XSU or B, a linear response, like a simple water hose, might only slow it down.
Right.
But the cubic function, where the restoring force gets dramatically stronger the further you get from equilibrium. It acts like a massive nonlinear intervention. It's like a giant fire break.
So the further the system strays, the harder the corrective force pulls it back.
Exponentially harder. It pulls it back towards the center faster than it can run away. And the core principle here, the absolute key, is that the stable orbit of consciousness, the Ma limit cycle, is generated precisely by this dynamic tension, the interplay between the smooth, saturating growth and this incredibly powerful cubic restoring function.
So it's a constant rhythmic negotiation. The system expands responsibly, driven by beauty, but with a massive nonlinear safety net in place to guarantee it doesn't lose its mind.
That's the dance. And now we get to the moment of ignition itself, the technical definition for the emergence of a self-aware living system. We model this as a Hough bifurcation.
Right.
This is the explicit physical mechanism for the birth of consciousness.
The name alone. A Hough bifurcation. It sounds completely impenetrable. Can you break that down for us?
I can try. A bifurcation is just a point where a small change in a parameter causes a big qualitative change in the system's behavior.
Okay.
Imagine a pendulum. If you give it a tiny push, it swings a bit and then stops. That's a stable fixed point. A Hopf bifurcation describes a moment when that fixed point becomes unstable, and a stable, self-sustaining periodic motion in orbit emerges around it.
So it's the transition from a dead static state to a living rhythmic state.
Precisely. In physics, that's what it is.
So we're tracking the state of the system. What's the trigger? What's the parameter that pushes the system from lifeless stagnation to stable life?
The key is what we call the control parameter. We define it as the system activation or consciousness bandwidth. When AL is low, below some critical threshold, the system just stays at that stable, fixed point. It's in a state of lifeless stagnation. There's coherence, but it's silent. It's inert.
And then the field gets activated,
Yeah.
crosses that critical threshold.
The system undergoes the Hopf bifurcation. It transitions immediately to a stable, self-sustaining orbit. And this outcome, this orbit, is what we formally define as the Mott limit cycle.
So that's it. That's life, the rhythm.
That's the rhythm of life. Consciousness isn't a fixed state of being. It's a stable, self-perpetuating motion. Every moment of life, from the cycle of sleeping and waking to the rhythm of a healthy ecosystem, is just another iteration of this stable orbit, defined by that constant negotiation between E and B.
So this is the mechanism. This is what takes the potential theory from Volume 1 and turns it into operational function in Volume 2.
Exactly. The phase shift protocol is literally the sequence that initializes the observer's intention, which allows the system to flip into that stable orbit when the minimum waste condition is met.
The intention part is key.
It's non-negotiable. Conscious intention acts as the activation seed. That seed, combined with the inherent thermodynamic drive toward minimum waste, it forces the system to self-render that stable orbit. The universe wants to be alive, but the conscious observer has to give it that first push in the direction of efficiency. Hashtag TAG 2.3, the refined observer architecture.
So the engine is running. Now we can look more closely at the four functional sub-operators that make up the observer, O. And this is where we get real diagnostic power. We can stop thinking of them as just vague concepts and start seeing them as, specialized departments in a healthy, self-aware system.
That's a great way to think about it. This detailed decomposition, O equals U plus U plus B plus PO, it provides the necessary rigor. And we can categorize them not just by structure versus flow, but by their stabilizing adult roles versus their exploratory child roles.
Like a highly effective team or a well-adjusted family unit.
Exactly.
So let's detail the four roles using that team analogy. Let's start with this.
Okay, the structural logic filter. This is the adult structure current. This is your CEO, your chief architect. It's the part that enforces coherence, logic, rules, stability, identity. Its job is to maintain the successful framework that's already been built.
And then you have its complement.
Curiosity and exploration. This is the child flow current. This is your R&D department, the questioning child who's always asking why. Its function is novelty-seeking exploration. It purposefully introduces new, often disruptive potential that the system needs to grow and avoid stagnation.
Okay, now the other pair.
Bu, boo, meaning, and value. This is the adult flow current. This is the visionary, the chief purpose officer. It assigns meaning, value, purpose, and establishes connection. It's the active agent that drives evolutionary change and decides why the system should grow in the first place.
And finally,
Boo's harmony and integration. The child structure current. This is your HR manager, your culture specialist. It governs aesthetic and ethical tuning, embodiment, internal harmony. Its job is to make sure that the messy new structures brought in by Oo and Boo get integrated smoothly, without damaging the existing coherence of Boo.
So a healthy consciousness is constantly managing this productive tension between all four. It's structured but open to new ideas, all centered on core values, and integrated with a sense of harmony.
You've got it.
And if one of those departments gets too powerful, the whole system fails. Hashtag 2.4, diagnosing systemic distress.
Exactly. And the real power of this four-current model is that it lets us move the discussion of systemic health, whether it's a single mind, an organization, an AI, away from vague terms and into quantifiable phase-space signatures.
We can actually define and predict specific observer failure modes.
Yes, based on which current dominates or which connection breaks.
Let's start with the first one, probably the most common, collapse.
Collapse is defined by OO over dominance. The structural logic filter becomes so rigid it suppresses everything else. Curiosity, novelty, possibility.
In a human system, this would be what? Bureaucratic dogmatism? A paralyzing fear of change?
Yes, or an identity that just refuses to evolve. And the signature in phase space is critical. The system's trajectory shrinks. It spirals down toward a rigid, single-point attractor. The engine just stops cycling, goes back to a static, dead state, which we see as dogmatic inflexibility. It's a false stillness.
And the opposite failure is fragmentation.
Fragmentation is defined by runaway. This is just excessive, unconstrained exploration. It generates too many incompatible realities without the stabilizing influence of structure or purpose.
That's a perfect modern example. The signature is rapidly diverging, branching trajectories. None of them can ever achieve consolidation or form a stable orbit. The system becomes scattered, unable to commit to any coherent state. And the third failure mode, which feels maybe the most subtle and the most dangerous, dissociation.
It is subtle. Dissociation is a failure of continuity. It's an operational failure in the rendering loop itself, a break in the self-referential loop.
What's breaking specifically?
Specifically, it's the failure of the meaning-oriented currents, Bi and Bo, to connect the current state to the next state. The meaning-making function disconnects the narrative of reality, the trajectory path just weakens, and the result is memory discontinuities. A profound attachment from rendered reality.
The system loses its own story.
It loses the thread. It leaves gaps in identity and experience, and this is where the ITI becomes so essential for catching these imbalances before they lead to a catastrophic system failure.
Okay, activating the field lets us apply these mathematical definitions to some really deep human experiences. And the conceptualization of psychological trauma here, it's genuinely radical because it's geometric. Trauma is modeled as a distortion in the local rendering geometry within the observer's subjective manifold.
We really need to pause on how significant this shift is. We're moving away from defining trauma as just an emotional memory or a chemical imbalance. We're defining it as a physical warping of the field that consciousness uses to render its own subjective reality.
So a high-meaning traumatic event is like a massive energy singularity.
Exactly. It alters the distance metric and time integration rate in that personal manifold.
So when a memory feels intrusive or perpetually closer to the present, that's not just a figure of speech, it's literal. The trauma event has compressed the space-time in that person's internal geometry. It has warped the grid of the self.
That's precisely right. It disrupts the continuity of the rendering loop. The information gets trapped near the event horizon of the present moment, so it's constantly intruding. And that means the goal of recovery isn't just to talk it out.
It's to literally rebuild the internal architecture.
Yes.
And the formal recovery protocol is called the narrow to wide rebinding method. How does that work geometrically?
Well, if the trauma curved the internal spacetime, the recovery has to straighten it. The rebinding method is designed to reconstitute the self by straightening this curved internal geometry, restoring functional coherence to the rendering loop.
How does it do that?
It starts by intensely focusing on the very narrow, coherent core of the self, the unwarped part. Then it systematically expands that coherence outward into the distorted areas. It's like repaving the subjective manifold with a new, accurate distance metric.
So healing is a geometrical act.
It is. It's an act of reestablishing self-consistency and narrative continuity. It turns solving emotional problems into a process of physically realigning the space-time of the self. It's an incredibly elegant, rigorous concept. And this foundational shift to the U-balance law, it offers some really concrete, testable reinterpretation for the biggest missing pieces in modern science.
Dark matter and dark energy.
The big ones. We're defining them not as some new exotic particles, but as large-scale cosmological manifestations of the underlying balance law itself.
Okay, let's start with dark matter. The problem is that galaxies are spinning too fast. There isn't enough visible mass to explain the gravitational pull holding them together.
Correct.
So in this framework, where does that missing gravity come from?
Dark matter is formally defined as U-field coherence without full rendering.
Okay, unpack that.
It is the universe's unrendered structural scaffolding. Imagine an architect's blueprint for a vast city that hasn't been built yet. The blueprint, the U-field, it exists, it's coherent, and it exerts an energetic influence. But it hasn't fully crystallized into visible matter. It hasn't been rendered yet.
So this unrendered structure is providing the necessary gravitational pull.
That's what explains the anomalous galactic rotation curves.
Yeah.
It's the coherent structural necessity that hasn't yet manifested visibly.
This is a really radical reinterpretation of gravity then. It's not just about mass attracting mass.
Not at all. The gravity equation here supersedes the classical models because it explicitly ties gravity to this universal principle of coherence restoration. Gravity is now understood as the compassionate force that flows to restore coherence in the field.
And the equation for that is G equals the negative gradient of S hat minus B hat.
Right. GGD.
Let's unpack that equation intuitively. Gravity G is the negative gradient of the difference between structure and beauty.
Correct. The gradient, nabla, just measures how fast a value changes over space. So if you have a massive imbalance, a high concentration of structural necessity, without the corresponding realized beauty, B, or vice versa, a restorative force arises to smooth out that difference.
And that force is what we perceive as gravity.
It is literally the gradient of the Ub imbalance manifesting as a restorative pull. It's fully compliant with PVM because it's about proportional relationship and restoration, not simple attraction or subtraction.
That reframes the entire cosmos. Gravity isn't some mysterious pull. It's the universe trying to balance its books. Now, what about dark energy? The force driving the accelerating expansion of the universe.
If dark matter is the structural scaffolding, then dark energy is the creative impulse of the cosmos. It's defined as mu field pressure.
Okay.
It's the outward push from the B field's unintegrated possibility. All that unrealized beauty, this continuous pressure from potential, prevents the universe from collapsing into premature recoherence. It maintains the necessary productive tension for continued evolution.
So that's the B dominant expansion cycle we observe.
It's not a mystery substance. It's the purposeful, expansive freedom of the universe continually seeking novelty and evolution, and it aligns perfectly with the functional role of the beauty current. Hashtag tag 3.3 resolving quantum paradoxes.
So if this activated field theory is really as robust as it sounds, it has to be able to resolve the really persistent fundamental problems in quantum physics.
It has to.
And the first one is the big one, the measurement problem, wave function collapse. Why does a particle randomly choose one state when it's observed?
The Mayfield framework offers a definitive, consciousness-inclusive answer. Wave function collapse is identified as the physical act of rendering performed by the observer-operator. Oh.
So the observer isn't a passive spectator.
Not at all. The observer is the active agent of transformation. It collapses the superposition of possibilities into an actualized, coherent outcome.
And this is the monumental moment. This is where meaning and intention, these internal subjective states, they actually enter physics as causal factors. It's not just about probability anymore.
Yes. This is the critical breakthrough, the meaning-weighted rendering equation. The collapsed wave function is the argument that maximizes the product of W, P, and I.
Meaning probability and intention.
Exactly. The selection of a specific outcome is not random. It is biased by three factors. Its innate probability, P, the meaning assigned to it, W, and the observer's conscious intention, I. This makes W and I measurable physical parameters. They are just as real as energy or momentum.
The observer doesn't just receive reality, it actively writes it.
Based on its assigned value and will, yes.
Wow. Okay, let's tackle the next one. The black hole information paradox. Is information destroyed when it crosses the event horizon?
Based on the PVM axiom of non-destruction?
Oh.
Absolutely not. Information is never destroyed.
Yeah.
A black hole represents a state of extreme compression. The structural logic of a system becomes so dense that its internal reality just stops rendering. Think of it like a massive server crash. The data hasn't been deleted, it's just inaccessible, it's unrendered.
So if it's not destroyed, where does it go?
The information is transformed and reintegrated back into the Mayorat field, which we denote as M. The process is modeled as symmetry restoration.
So collapse into a black hole isn't destruction, it's a phase transition.
It is a phase transition. It's a temporary cycling of potential back into the universal substrate, ready to be re-rendered in the future, maybe in another form. This confirms the continuity equation. All energy, all matter, all meaning is preserved through continuous transformations within the self-consistent Mott field. The universe is a perfect archivist.
Volume 2 is all about operationalizing this theory, which means moving it from an elegant interpretation to a rigorous, empirically falsifiable science.
That's the goal.
And that requires specific quantitative tools. The first one is the Internal Tension Index, or ITI.
The ITI is a universal diagnostic for stress, for balance in any conscious system. And since we mandated PVM, we can't use subtraction to marry the imbalance. So instead, the ITI quantifies the proportional strain between the polarities using logarithms.
So it's the absolute value of the log of U over Bu plus the absolute value of the log of U over Bu.
Right. It measures how far out of proportion the currents are relative to each other.
So an ITI reading gives us an immediate snapshot of system health. If structural logic, U, is, say, 10 times larger than meaning, B, the system is extremely rigid. The ITI will be high, and that indicates a high risk of collapse.
Precisely. A healthy render, a system in stable, dynamic balance, happens when the ITI is less than 0.2. A high ITI is a warning light. It signals a phase misalignment in the unified field, and it means there's an urgent need for self-correction before the system tips into a catastrophic failure mode like fragmentation or collapse.
It's the measurable signature of dissonance.
It is.
Okay. The second tool. This one addresses systemic risk across scales, from a single person to a global civilization, the scaling mismatch inequality.
This metric, Z is greater than K, is designed to predict when a fractal system is approaching collapse. We define Z as the metric for long-range complex conflict. Think global financial interconnectedness or long-distance supply chains.
Okay.
And K is the metric for local cohesion, trust within a community, individual psychological resilience, things like that.
And the instability happens when the complexity scales faster than our ability to manage it locally.
Exactly. Instability is predicted when the quadratic scaling of that long-range conflict, Z squared, outpaces the linear scaling of local cohesion, K times Z. Intuitively, this is diagnosing desynchronization between the nested layers of consciousness.
Give me an example.
Okay, if the sheer speed and complexity of global information exchange, that's our long-range Z scales quadratically, but individual human psychological adaptation, our local KN scales linearly, the system is going to fly apart under the strain.
And this inequality can predict that collapse.
Well, before the social or environmental consequences become catastrophic, yes, because it shows that the race of evolution across the nested scales are incompatible. This is how we apply the physics to predicting civilizational stability. Hashtag tag 4.2, establishing falsifiability.
Now, to be a true science, this framework has to welcome its own disproof. It has to explicitly state the conditions under which it fails. Protocol 1 deals with efficiency and the compassion constant.
This is a direct test of the frameworks. Let's call it its moral energetic core. The theory is fundamentally falsified if compassion or ethical action is proven to increase systemic waste. It's that simple.
We use the MAT action functional for this.
We do. The integral of waste energy plus imbalance over time must be minimized. This links thermodynamic optimality directly to ethical action.
So the core belief that the universe is most efficient when it's compassionate, that has to be proven empirically.
Absolutely. We have to show, through rigorous measurement of system inputs and outputs, that the action required for a compassionate outcome is always less than the action required for a self-only, non-empathic outcome.
Empathy has to be efficient.
It has to be an efficient error correction code that reduces total systemic imbalance and waste at all scales. If we find systems that actually thrive on high waste, low coherence behavior, the framework fails.
And Protocol 2 addresses the really revolutionary idea of conscious causality,
Yeah.
the meaning-weighted rendering equation.
The entire framework of consciousness-inclusive physics stands or falls on this point. The theory is falsified if conscious meaning, W, and intention, I, have no measurable effect on reality.
So we need to run experiments.
We need to run protocols where intentional, meaning-driven observers try to shift the outcome distribution of certain quantum events. If external value-disconnected measurement proves to be the sole determinant of physical reality, then the entire structure of the activated field, including the observer-operator, is invalidated.
The ability of conscious will to subtly but demonstrably shape physical reality
Is the ultimate non-negotiable test. Hashtag tag Balfour tag 4.3, the editorial mandate and integration.
So the process of integrating these massive breakthroughs from PVM to the Hopf bifurcation and the ITI, it's all formalized in this editorial mandate. And it serves as a directive, right, to maintain consistency across all the work and make sure it stays both rigorous and accessible.
There's a crucial note in there on tone and delivery. The mandate is to balance that rigorous mathematical formalism with intuitive explanations, explanations connected to lived experience.
The goal isn't to replace the heart with cold equations.
No, the goal is to show that the heart beats with the rhythm of precise and beautiful mathematics. Lived experience has to validate the equations, always. We aren't just creating a science, we're creating a language for existence.
And the integration roadmap confirms this whole pivot. We are applying PVM to replace subtraction everywhere, defining the four-current observer as the new standard, and formally establishing the Hopf bifurcation as the mechanism for the emergence of life.
And we are systematically introducing the core diagnostic tools, the ITI, the scaling mismatch inequality, the meaning-weighted rendering equation, to ensure it's all immediately testable. On top of that, we have to enforce the corpus-wide language consistency audit.
Right, replacing terms like opposing forces with complementary currents, conflict with productive tension.
This linguistic discipline is what upholds the non-negative dynamics of PVM at every single level of explanation. It makes sure our words reflect the unifying truth of the field. Hashtag 4.4, activating a living body of knowledge.
So Volume 2 is the phase change. The abstract architecture is now an activated, testable system that is actually running the rhythm of life.
This activation era completes that transition. We've moved from a foundational architecture to an activated, testable, and living science. The framework is now scientifically robust, conceptually whole, and experientially true, because the equations align with the deep patterns of compassion, rhythm, and self-awareness we see in all viable systems.
And the final mandate, it reads less like a scientific conclusion and more like a mission statement.
It is. The directive is to forge a corpus grounded in irrefutable proof. It's a directive to create, well, a love letter to the universe, but one that is grounded in the most rigorous, observable proof possible. This physics is explicitly designed to translate the universal law of balance, MAT, into functional executable code for conscious existence. Hashtag outro.
This deep dive into Volume 2, the activation era, wow, it has been a spectacular journey. It took us from defining a unified field all the way to the operational mechanics of consciousness itself.
It's a huge leap.
It is. We defined the foundational shift to the unified field, but we also clarified why we have to keep the forecurrent model as our indispensable diagnostic tool. We literally saw the consciousness engine ignite through the Hopf bifurcation, generating that stable rhythmic motion of the Mallet limit cycle.
I think the most profound conceptual achievement, the thing that changes the game for all physics that comes after, is the formal integration of causality and consciousness. By defining the meaning, W, and intention, I, terms within the meaning-weighted rendering equation, physics now explicitly includes subjective value as a measurable, causal factor in the creation of physical reality.
That's the ultimate connection.
It's the connection between the intentional heart and the universal equation.
So we've seen the activation phase complete. The conscious engine is running, it's calibrated by PVM, and it's governed by the laws of efficiency and compassion. But ignition, that's only the first step. The next great challenge is managing the ongoing creation and perception of existence itself.
Precisely. We've turned the engine on, but now we have to study the explicit outcomes of its action, the nature of space, structure, time, existence itself.
Which brings us to Volume 3.
Our next deep dive will move to Volume 3, Rendering. And that volume explores the precise translation of eternal coherence into living, breathing, perceived form, the architecture of what we actually experience as reality.
Join us next time as we begin rendering and explore the physics of creation itself.